What do you do when your therapist talks way, way too much? Do you cut them off and never come back to therapy again? Do you confront them in the session? Do you send them an email before your next session? Or do you just suck it up and let them keep talking? Let's talk about it. So, I've heard this so many times over the years during my training and even in my own experience as well. People have met therapists and counselors who just talk way, way too much. They talk about themselves, they talk over the client, they spend lots of time sharing personal details unnecessarily, and it's never a nice or positive experience. Like I said, I've had my own and I've done a story time on it, which you can watch after this video, and there's also going to be linked in the description box. Like, it's not a nice experience at all. So, firstly, I'm going to address what clients can do, and then at the end, I'm going to briefly address therapists and counselors who are hopefully also watching this video and what they can do as well. So, what do I mean by your therapist talking too much? So, one way could be that they literally just share so much about themselves, like unnecessarily. They share way, way too much about their personal life, about themselves as an individual. You know everything that there is to know about them. You know their dog's age, birthday, you know how many nieces they've got, you know where they went on holiday last year, you know when their uncle died, you know what they did before they became a counselor, like just so many things that are just not necessary or helpful to the therapeutic process. And somehow through your sessions together, you've just gotten to know so much about their lives, whether through you asking or even not asking, somehow they just end up sharing all these details about themselves. Another way could just be that they spend a lot of time storytelling or giving a lot of advice, which of course we know therapists are not supposed to give advice. They shouldn't be giving advice in the first place. But let's say, for example, you say something and then they're like, oh, yeah, I remember when I was a teacher as well. And I used to have this student who used to do the same thing. And then they go storytelling and they start going on a tangent about something that they experienced because of something you've mentioned. But it's no longer about you, it's now about them and their experience. So some therapists may be talkative in that sense. Or you may say something, like, I've been having a lot of trouble losing weight. And they're like, you know what? I remember when I struggled to lose weight. Here's what I did. I did this and I did this. And they start giving so much unsolicited advice. And you haven't even had a chance to fully express yourself. You haven't even finished your thoughts. And they already jumped in there explaining and giving advice and, trying to tell you how to manage whatever it is that you've brought up before you've even finished explaining it, bear in mind. And this kind of therapist seems to get lost in their own world and they forget that you're even there. And it's like you're not even present anymore, and suddenly they've become the client or they've become like their own individual person and you're just there to listen to them rather than the other way around. So the kind of therapists that offer advice or do a lot of storytelling, I've experienced one who did that to me, like would just give a lot of unsolicited advice before I could even fully express myself. And I found myself sitting there just like seething with anger, like, why are you telling me what to do? I haven't even explained everything about the situation. I found myself so angry. So there's those kinds of therapists as well. And nobody likes unsolicited advice. Nobody enjoys being told what to do, especially when they haven't asked for it. So that one I don't have to explain too much. It definitely can happen. And another situation is that your therapist could be spending an awful lot of time giving you psychoeducation or explaining a lot of things to you, a lot of theories, or explaining psychological concepts to you in such a way that maybe even starts to feel like a lecture, like you should be sitting there with a notebook and taking notes about what they're saying. Like they just want you to understand the theory of everything and all of that. They could be that kind of therapist where they're just doing a lot of psychoeducation, of which psychoeducation is not wrong. I think sometimes it can be very helpful, especially if it's a technique that they're using to help you. It helps to then explain to you what they're doing and why they're doing it. But if that's what they do every session and they're constantly spending lots and lots of time giving you psychoeducation rather than actually being present with you and talking to you about what you want to talk about, then that becomes a problem. And then I think another common one is a therapist who will either regularly interrupt you or finish off your sentences for you. Now, this is terrible in so many ways, I can't even begin to explain it. But yes, a therapist like this, I think, is quite common. So sometimes they'll kind of just jump in, like maybe you're trying to explain something and you're trying to find the right words or you're trying to remember something, a specific detail. So you pause, and instead of just letting you take the time to think and find the word that you're looking for, they just jump in and they try to finish your sentence for you instead of just allowing you to take your time. Or they might just, while you're speaking, they might just interrupt and jump in and speak over you. And if that's something they do often, that also counts as them talking way too much, because that's not what they should do. I think, of course, sometimes once in a while, these things can happen with a therapist. So all the things I've explained, of course, it's not to say that all therapists do this, but I'm just talking specifically for the ones that talk way too much. And the scenarios I've described are scenarios that happen more often than not. So if these are things that are consistently happening in every session that you have, then it's obviously a problem. But if it's something that happens once in a while and you find that you're still being helped and you're still making progress in your therapy, then of course it's not necessarily a problem. But that doesn't mean you can't address it. Even if it does happen once or twice here and there, you can still address it with your therapist and say, there's sometimes I notice you do this and you do that. But anyways, let me not get ahead of myself. I will explain and talk about how to handle a situation like this as a client. So let's move on. One way is to obviously confront the therapist, and there's different ways to go about this. So let's break it down. I think the first way is obviously being quite straightforward and to address it as it's happening in the session, especially if it's something that you've noticed maybe in the last session or the past 2 or 3 sessions or however long it's been going on for. Addressing it as it's happening in the session, as they've just interrupted you or as they've spent like the past 10 minutes just talking at you. You can just literally jump in and be like, I've noticed that you've been talking a lot more and I feel like I haven't got space to express myself, and I don't feel like you're hearing me and that you're listening to me, or I feel like you're sharing too much about your personal life, things that I don't really feel like I should know or that I need to know, and it's taken us away from the reason why we're here. Or sometimes I feel like I've left my sessions not having fully expressed myself, or I feel like I haven't been heard. Whatever it might be, however you want to phrase it, I think that's one way of doing it, is that you address it while it's happening in the session there and then. Confrontation sometimes can be seen as an ugly word. Like, it doesn't have to be aggressive, it doesn't have to be forceful. It's just about being open and saying, this is what's happening right here, right now. And it's a lot harder for the therapist to argue or defend themselves when you've confronted it in the moment. And a good therapist will listen and be accepting and open to this, whether you address it there and then or later. Which brings me on to the next way of confronting this issue. If you feel like the first way of dealing with this is a bit too confrontational, the next way that you can deal with this is by doing it at the start of the session or at the end of the session. So you can bring it up like, last week I noticed that, or I felt this and that, or at the end of the session when you know you're about to finish, in about 5 or 10 minutes, you can bring it up. And then that way the therapist can sit on it and think about it once the session is done, or at the start of the session, so that it's not going to be a repeated thing throughout that session. Of course, this may still be a bit too confrontational for you. And if it is, here's another thing that you can do. You could, depending on the form of communication that you use with your therapist, I'm just going to say email, but whether you text or you email them or you call them, whatever it is that you do, you could confront them by writing an email before your next session and just explaining that this is how you feel and this is what you've noticed, and that you're uncomfortable with it, or that you don't like it, or that you wish that they would stop, and that it's impacting your ability to enjoy therapy and to make progress in therapy. Whatever it is that you're feeling, you can express it via email and let them know before the next session. And most likely they will probably wait to speak with you about it in the session. So even if you send it via email, expect that it will be brought up in the session. Unless you say that you don't want to talk about it in the session and you just wanted to write it over email, then express that as well. So those are the ways to deal with that in terms of confrontation, regarding when you feel uncomfortable with your therapist talking way too much. Now, if confrontation is not for you, or you feel like, what, I don't have to deal with this and I don't want to put up with this, another option is literally just to leave and not come back. Of course, you could do this in several ways, and let's go through them. So the first way is, of course, you can just say to your therapist, I don't want to come back because of this reason and that reason and that reason, and my choice is, or my decision is final. I don't want to continue therapy because you've made me feel uncomfortable, or I don't enjoy it, or I don't feel heard, or we spend more time talking about you than me, and that kind of stuff. So you could say that, whether that's in the session, via email. You can just tell them that you're leaving and that you're not coming back to the next session, and you're done. There's nothing that they can do but respect your wishes. And of course, some therapists might just be like, okay, that's fine, I understand, and I'm sorry. Some therapists might try and get you to come back to apologize, or try to have one more session so that they can have an ending session with you. But of course, ultimately, the decision is up to you, whether you have another closing, finishing session, or you leave it at that. Another option that might work for you might be just going cold turkey. You don't even explain or say that you're going to leave. You could just say, I don't want to come back, and you don't even give a reason. You could just be like, yeah, I'm done with our therapy, and I don't want to explain why, but I don't want to come back. Some therapists obviously would love to know why you're leaving. especially if it was before your contracted end time. But the choice is ultimately, once again, up to you. And the other option, like I said, is to go cold turkey. You could be like, yeah, see you next week, but then you just never turn up and you don't respond to them. You don't tell them why you're leaving. You don't say anything. You don't indicate to them that you're going to leave. And of course, this is not the nicest way to go about it. But I've had clients do this to me, and I'm not the first or last therapist that will have a client just disappear out of thin air and never contact them, never respond to them. It happens. And if this is what works for you, then of course, feel free to do that as well. I'm just trying to offer all the different ways that you can handle the situation, whether it feels good for the therapist or not. At the end of the day, the choice is yours. Now, I hope that you'll find something that works in all the different ways to confront this that I've listed. My biggest hope is that you don't even have to experience this in the first place. But if this is something you're currently experiencing, then you can utilize one of these strategies. And if it's something you haven't experienced, I hope you don't. But if you ever do, then you know where to come to. Now, I'd like to address the therapist who is talking too much. First of all, now, if you are the therapist that is talking too much, I hope that you can start to reflect and actually start to notice it, because maybe you might not even notice that you're talking too much, but start to notice it within yourself and start to think about your sessions. And if you are a therapist who records their sessions, with the permission of your clients, listen to the sessions and listen to how much you're talking. Are you talking more than the client? Are you sharing stuff about yourself unnecessarily? Ask yourself some questions. Am I leaving enough silence for the client to think? How much of the session is me explaining versus the client exploring? Am I projecting a need to be helpful? There's so many things that you can reflect on as you listen to those recordings or as you reflect on your sessions. And even during the sessions, just be present and be aware, like, how am I being with the client? And if possible, sometimes, depending on the relationship with the client, I wouldn't recommend doing this too frequently, is, when you do progress checks or progress reviews, to kind of hear what the client has to say about you and how they're experiencing you, if possible. I know that not every therapist does this, and I know that it's not for every modality, but if you're able to, sometimes getting feedback from your client directly is the most helpful thing, because at the end of the day, you can't read their mind and assume that you're being a good therapist, that they're finding you helpful. So that's the first thing I'd say for the therapist that talks too much, is start to reflect and to look back on your sessions and think about how you are in the room and work on that, on being actively present with the client. The second thing I'd say is, if you are a therapist that shares way too much and is divulging a lot of personal information about yourself, or sharing a lot of your own experiences, every time the client shares something, you bring in your own stuff that you've experienced. If you find yourself doing this a lot, maybe consider going to therapy, because maybe there's a chance that you don't have a space or a place where you can freely share and talk about yourself. So you kind of then put yourself in the client role when your client is present, and you may not even have the freedom to do that with your supervisor, because when you're with your supervisor, you're probably talking about your clients a lot more than you're talking about yourself. So I would suggest and recommend going to therapy so that you have a space to talk, and where it's all just about you and you're able to share as much as you want without limits. Because at the end of the day, that would be in the best interest of the client, which is in line with the BCP ethical framework. So think about what you're doing with the client. Is it in the best interest of the client for them to know about the date that you went on last week? Is it in the best interest of the client for them to know about a funeral that you're going to next week? Like, all of these things, do they really need to know this? Is it helping the client? Is it benefiting the client for them to know these things about me? So that's the second thing that I would recommend if you find that you are the therapist that talks too much. So all in all, I'm really hoping that we can all get to experience a therapy that is a safe space and a place where there's trust and a place of growth. So for clients, I encourage you to be an advocate for yourself and to speak up for yourself as much as you can. Your therapist should not be defensive. Your therapist should not be argumentative. And if they are, then you have every right to just leave and walk away without explaining yourself. Your therapist should be open and welcoming to hearing your feedback and how you feel about how they are in the room with you, or online, or whichever form of therapy you're having. So do try and speak up and share what's on your mind, especially if it's something that's making the therapeutic relationship strained or uncomfortable for you. Definitely speak up as much as you can. And for the therapist, I encourage you to stay reflective and curious about your clients, and to constantly look inward and reflect within yourself and think about how the client may be experiencing you, and if possible, ask for feedback. But don't pressure clients to give you feedback if they don't want to, and don't put them in a position where they feel like they have to say something nice to make you feel good. But observe your relationship with the client and work your way from there. So I hope that this was helpful. If you feel comfortable, please share your own personal experiences in the comment section. I know I shared mine already, but yeah, let's have a chit chat in the comment section. So if you are interested in listening to my story time, I'll have it linked at the end of this video and you can watch that now. Until the next video, good night or have a good day wherever you're watching from in the world. Bye.